It would help if I was using the right thing.
Hey, Amy.
Oh,
we're
hi,
just we're just
Shay.
lamenting technology, and sometimes it's operator error, sometimes it's not.
Yeah.
Things happen.
Well,
Things happen.
in my case, it's almost always operator error. As we just discovered yet again, operator error. Hold on just a second.
Yeah.
Okay, can you hear me?
I can hear you really good. Can you hear
Okay,
me
good.
okay?
Yes, yeah.
All right.
So, I have not really stopped thinking about what we talked about last week, Shane. I still have got this
Hmm.
vision of you standing up on a table in some
Scary.
warehouse, like giving the just going to town. I was like, wow. But the one thing I can't that visual aid helped me remember the point is that you
Hmm.
have to value people, right? They're not a commodity.
That's right.
And was it John Maxwell that said, value when you value what other people value, they'll value what you value,
Yeah. Yeah.
right?
He's big. He's big on the whole valuing people thing for sure.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And I think that point really has landed on me. It's made me think
Hmm.
through some things, even relationships, like, oh, okay, helping me even see that people that I didn't think
Mm.
found value in me just by how they act. I'm starting to ask myself the question of, do they actually value you, Amy? Because they're not treating you like a commodity.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it was a really good conversation.
Mm.
So thank you for sharing that very
Truly.
vulnerable moment with us last week.
You're welcome.
Yeah.
I'm
And if you
trying to
got,
get the image out of my mind,
yeah,
and it's burned into yours.
oh gosh, it's there. I don't know it's ever going to go away, but the lesson is so good.
Oh man.
And for those that might have no clue as to what
Hmm.
we're talking about, just go back and listen to last week's a series of unfortunate events that led to a successful situation for Shane. And hopefully, you will find as much value in it as I did. So we're doing a bit of a little series here where we're sharing some unfortunate events, things that you don't see coming, that there was pain or there was a hard lesson learned, but it actually launched us to a new place. It launched us to a new place of success. It launched us to new skills that helped us up level and go to the places we wanted to go. So I'm going to add to that series today. Okay, Shane?
Just bring it.
All right.
I'm looking forward to this.
Okay. Well, I'm often reminded, I'm not often asked this, but I am often reminded of the really the season. It was a very long season, many
Mm.
years, as a child that helped me develop the skill of observation. That also through that skill, I learned the skill set of drawing conclusions from a series of patterns,
Mm.
right? At the
Mm.
time, I did not know I was having a scientific season of learning, but I was. And today I can say that the work that I do is much more impactful because of what I learned in this season. So, Shane, you know that I have three siblings, one of which is younger than me. And my mother's pregnancy with her was typical. There was no medical issues. Her name is Katherine,
Mhm.
for those of you that don't know. And she was a typical child. Well, the day of delivery comes, and I just remember my delivery day. Like I was just especially the first one. And this was not my mother's first one, but even my second one, I was just as nervous round two as I was in the first round, right? So you've got all of these, there's already stress of
Mm.
getting to the hospital on time. You don't want to feel the pain. So can I please get an epidural? Or do I have all the skills I need to get through the pain?
Mm.
Um, is everything going to be okay with me and my baby? Those are
Those are
lingering
good questions.
questions,
Mhm.
and my mother would be no different than any other mother that was going in to deliver Catherine the day that she did.
Mm.
Actually, on September 11th is
Oh
Catherine's
wow.
birthday.
How about that?
So, they go in for delivery and everything is going fine. And my sister is delivered like every other typical child. However, her face is surrounded by the birth sac, right? So in essence, when she comes out, that birth sac clings to your face like saran wrap, and she's not able to breathe. And so the doctors give my sister to the nurse that's standing nearby, and the nurse, unbeknownst to anyone in that room, lays my sister down and walks away. I mean, I am just thinking about my own birth experience. And as a father in the birthing room, like, can you imagine? Like,
I can't
imagine. Right. Well, and interestingly enough, it is terrifying. Interestingly enough, my dad was not allowed in the birthing room. So was my mom in there with, teams of
all these doctor people. Yeah.
Doctors. Yep. She doesn't have an advocate. And quite frankly, neither did my sister. So she's laid down in the bed, the birthing bed. And my mom is being attended to, can't see what's happening. And Katherine lays there and suffocates to death, completely to death. That's how long she laid there before anyone checked on her. Yeah. I mean, it is an horrific, unexplainable, I don't understand how these things happen kind of story. Right. And, the events unfold, and we learn that the nurse was highly intoxicated by alcohol. And that is why she lacked the judgment to tend to my sister. So Katherine went from a typical, healthy, having all of her faculties available to her, to now a child with a traumatic brain injury. She lived with chronic illness. And one of those illnesses was chronic seizure disorder. And Katherine would have what they call grand mal seizure, Shane, where they would just be so huge and horrific. You've got to get them to the hospital as fast as you could. Right. So here I am, 5 years old. My baby sister comes home for the first time, and you can feel the stress from my parents.
Oh, totally. Like, right? You even at that young age, I imagine, knew something is not right here.
Yes. And I was 5. I didn't know what was wrong, but I knew my parents were not okay. And I did not understand why. Right. So in that moment, I remember it so vividly, because it made an impression on my mind. Something is wrong here. I've got to learn to adapt to this environment. So that is the first lesson that came from this experience with a sister that now lives with different abilities and chronic illness, was I have to learn to adapt to the environment. Because if I don't, I'm going to live in fear. Right. So there was a fear that came over me. And then when I quickly adapted to my parents' new behaviors, which was much more serious, the lightheartedness had kind of left the room. There was a lot of attention put on my sister. And I knew that if I did, at 5 years old, I was like, adapt or die, basically. Like that was my only option. And that was the very first lesson that I can tell you set me on the course for being better in business than most of my peers, because I had to always be adapting to the situation. Does that make sense?
It totally does. Yeah. Yeah. And I think it's an interesting correlation that you're making here, like how this very personal experience shaped your perspective that has led you to a lot of success, within business. I want to hear more. Like, how was this? How did this start to flow into everything that you did? Right? Because I imagine it did, right?
Yeah. I mean, it changed everything at home. Right. My parents were no longer taking me to school. A babysitter was, because somebody had to stay with Katherine 24/7. So my parents, their work schedule changed. One went to night shift, one went to day shift. They both worked at the hospital. My sister's lifestyle required us to be ready in any opportunity. We had to be ready to drop everything and go to the hospital, right? So we would sleep with clothes on the end of our bed, because the time that it took us to change, to get the clothes out of the drawer, get them out of the closet, get them out of the dirty clothes bin, change our clothes, could be life or death for her. Wow. So we had to learn to live in a constant state of flux and adaptation. But what I also started to notice over the years is that due to things that Katherine would eat, or times of more sleep versus less sleep, this pattern began to emerge that these would be the times to be more on alert and less relaxed. So dependent upon her daily activity, depended upon if I needed to be more aware of being ready to get out of bed, or if I could relax a bit more and sleep, right? Because all of these factors affected her chronic health.
Would you say they were indicators that you could consistently see, like, all right, if we're trending this way, that means A, and if we're trending this way, that means B, and
yes.
Wow.
Yeah. And that's exactly what happened. So even if she refused, no child likes to take medicine. And at that time, there wasn't a lot of liquid alternatives for the small pharmacy of meds Katherine had to take just to keep her alive. And so there was a lot of like crushing of pills, and we were experimenting with, will you eat ice cream? Will you eat yogurt? Can we put it in milk? Will you swallow it? And all of these things we were constantly observing Katherine, because her life depended upon it. And so that skill of observing, what was her day like, observing my parents' disposition in the day, observing Katherine's intake of meds versus not meds, or a certain kind of diet versus, a different kind of diet. We found that fat helped her go more periods of time without a seizure than a leaner diet did. Right. So Katherine lived on cheese and avocados. I mean, literally, she would eat a whole cheese pizza, just the toppings. I mean, it's just so crazy.
That sounds amazing.
Right. Sounds amazing. I know. I was a bit jealous.
Right.
Yeah, I wish I could eat like that. But anyway, that lifestyle with Katherine, and as she got older and her hormones changed, another set of observations set in and things began to change. So it was a constant flux. It was a constant flexing. It was a constant learning to observe and then draw conclusions off of what we were observing and test those conclusions, much like a hypothesis, and see what would come of it. So, we gave her a whole avocado and she didn't have a grand mal seizure tonight. What happens if we do that tomorrow? Then let's do it another day. How many days can we all get some reprieve from having to jump out of bed and rush to the hospital? Wow. And yes, it was survival for her, but it was also survival for us, and yes, it really was a very hard, difficult life to live. And my life stayed that way until I was about 15 or 16 years old. There was no reprieve. There was no vacations. There was no sleeping over at friends' houses. And those things were awful. It really was a very isolating and lonely life. But in that little petri dish, if you will, or time capsule, I said, what can I draw here? What can I pull away? And that skill set of observing, drawing conclusions, testing my conclusions, and observing again is immediately what helped me understand the backside of an algorithm. The first chance anyone uncovered it to me, I was like, oh, look, we watch, we test, we draw a conclusion, we wait to see if it happens again, and then we reiterate. It was just it was a natural process for me that I had just already lived in. Yep. Now it came out of hell on earth.
I was gonna say a lot of pain. A lot of pain. Yep. But I mean, that's where all growth comes from in the end.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. And I think that it is Now, I'm not saying for us to ignore the side effects of events like that we have no control over.
Yeah.
They're going to affect our lifestyle. Things are going to have to
Mm.
change. But in the moment, what can I find satisfaction in? What can I learn? What can I pull from this opportunity? And you hear that, like I heard that for many years in growth books. I didn't really understand it, Shane. I really didn't understand it until I realized this is how I've always lived. Because if not, it meant becoming something which I had also observed I never wanted to be.
You didn't want to be. Yeah.
And if I had not had the negative effects, demonstrated to me of how you can negatively respond to a situation like Katherine, like what Katherine was put in. If I had not had that demonstrated, I know 100% I would have gone the bitter route because I would not have known better. Yeah. Right. But because it was in my face, I saw the demonstration of the bitter way. I just kept saying there has to be a better way. There has to be a better way. I cannot go that bitter way. I'm going to stay on the way that is better. And that is the lesson.
I even think that there's some of that was born out of this pattern that you just demonstrated, this constantly tending to and watching and evaluating and observing and then pivoting, and like even that gave you some of the power that you needed to say, I don't know yet which way, but it's not that way. It's not that way. I see what that produces and I want that. There's got to be a better way.
Yeah.
Let me ask you this, because you are the expert when it comes to the backside of this thing, of technology that's used to be able to grow businesses. And you and I have spent enough time together to where, I know that it takes more than just understanding the process. It takes you becoming a certain type of person who can consistently drive that process. What are the 1 to 2 character traits that you built in your journey with Katherine over time as a very little person that then produced you being the person you are today, that allows you to be so consistent doing this thing of building businesses?
That's such a good question. And you are always so kind to me and your encouragement. So thank you.
It's the truth. I'm with you, girl. Good stuff.
Well,
good stuff.
You have been a true soldier in this thing with me, and I'm so grateful.
Right on.
Well, I can say that one trait that I was reminded of today when I was talking to a client was the ability to be able to place value where value is right. Yeah. So many times in the process, especially in business, we place value on things like the amount of money.
Yeah.
Or the speed of the game to get to the amount of money. And what I learned by having to experiment with my sister's life, and that's exactly what we were doing. We were saying, okay, if we put her medicine in this food that's high fat versus this food that appears to the natural eye to be much better for her, it could have serious side effects. But we also realized that her having a lifelong debilitating grand mal seizure disorder was the higher value. Right. We knew for a fact we could get her to the hospital. We knew for a fact a ambulance could get to us. So if we had to put something in dairy versus non-dairy, that it could mean the difference between her sleeping all the way through the night, 2 consecutive nights in a row, versus again up, struggling to live night after night. What is the higher value?
Yeah, right. Let's try it.
Yes. And so being able to say, okay, what is the most important thing I'm out to achieve here? Really had to become the bigger conversation, not what do I want right now, but what could this produce down the road? And am I confident that it's not life-threatening, right? Now, in my work with people that own businesses, like the tests are not life threatening.
Right.
Okay. Like to own a business is quite frankly a luxury. It takes the two things that only people in luxury lifestyles have: money and time.
Yeah.
You know, and so you can't tell me that experimenting with a top of the funnel lead generator and really owning and being committed to the thing you do really well and stop experimenting with that, right? So really holding true to what you do well and not creating multiple offers because you're out to make the fastest dollar, versus why don't you experiment with the top of the funnel where the people are coming from, because that can be reiterated real easy. That holds very little value. It's the deeper steps that are much more valuable. Own those, master those, and don't move away from those, because the top of the funnel will always change. That's what I learned with Katherine is, okay,
good, man.
Live with a debilitating chronic lifestyle of never sleeping and being tortured night in and night out of dying, because that's ultimately what happens with a grand mal seizure. Or you might have an allergic reaction to dairy if I put your medicine there. I mean, these are the conversations that one must have, is what is the higher value I'm out to attain? And that was, I'm telling you, I learned that by having to experiment with Katherine and her schedule and her meds and her food and how fast we could get to the hospital and not get in a wreck. I mean, we're just talking about real life here. Everything was an experiment, but what we experimented on mattered. Powerful story.
And I think, the resilience that you built over all those years is a large part of who you are today. And I've benefited from it. I know people who are watching here have benefited from it, because it's what's allowed you to bring this forward to the rest of us. So on their behalf and my behalf, thank you. Thank you for sharing.
Thank you. And thank you, Katherine, who has outlived her life. They said she would only live to be 11, and she's now 41.
Wow.
Yeah. And so, she is also a great inspiration. So I'm grateful to have had this life with her, because I continue to learn. So just go out and find what is the better way versus the bitter way. And just always remember this: systems run the business, but we run the systems, and how we run those systems do matter. And they are a deeper, more valuable commodity to us, our character, versus the system or the platform that we're using to make money. So I hope you guys have a great week. And Shane, we'll talk next week.
Sounds great.